Hi, and welcome to this tutorial on writing the first draft of your research paper and how to work with your sources. This tutorial is probably going to be about 28 or 30 minutes long, so you may want to budget watching it in parts if you don't have that much time right now. Let's talk about quotations. Again, integrating sources into papers, whether they're literary analysis or research papers, is probably one of the most challenging tasks of Comp 2. So let's talk about that. Writers use quotations for a variety of purposes. You may be arguing with another author's definition of a term. You may want to provide statistical evidence or a testimony to validate your claim. You may want to present the reader with a statement that the writer will refute or discuss in detail. But it's important to remember that if writers overdo or include too many quotes in a researched paper, readers will form a negative impression that the authors of those sources are more authoritative than the writer of the research paper. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. But remember that your voice is the voice that we want to hear when we're reading your paper, not the voice of your sources. It is possible for the voices of those authorities to drown out the writer's voice, in that case you. So you don't want that to take over the authorship of your paper. And we're going to talk about how to make sure you don't do that. So let's look at reasons for direct quotes. First of all, you want to use direct quotes only when the source's words are particularly relevant or powerful. In other words, if it's something that you can paraphrase, then go ahead and do that. Of course, you would still cite it, but if they say it in such a way that it's just really relevant and powerful, then by all means quote it. Use a direct quote if they represent an apt example of that specific author's thinking. Again, an example that you couldn't replicate on your own. A good policy is to use short quotes, no more than 25 words, and otherwise summarize or paraphrase sources whenever possible. When summarizing, be sure to represent the author accurately and fairly. It's very important that you introduce your author, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. If you have to introduce a longer quote, in other words, longer than 40 words, please follow the rules for block quotes, and that is found in chapter 20 of your book if you need to be reminded of how to do that. Here are some warning signs that indicate you might have lost control of your quotes. In other words, they're controlling your paper. One is called the salting syndrome. This is if you can remove the quotes that have been sprinkled through the paper and still understand the essay, then the quotes are not an integral part of the essay and do not further the argument. Okay, so they need to be a part of what you're trying to say. A weak weave is when the reader sees only a glimpse of the writer's voice as it introduces long quotes from others. He or she will assume the writer has lost control over the text and could become frustrated over not reading any original commentary. So again, we don't want to see Smith says and then this really long quote and then you come in and have one sentence and then add another quote. You're stringing quotes together, and that's not effective. The overpowering opinion is if each paragraph begins with a quote, the writer's voice will be lost as the powerful opinion of an expert occupies the slot in which readers often expect to find a focus statement that organizes the information that's going to be presented in that paragraph. So, in other words, the best way to think of this is your paragraph should begin with a topic sentence. You don't ever want to begin a paragraph with a quote from one of your sources. So avoid that. The dreary design is if each quote is introduced using the same sentence structure and the same verb to indicate the author's opinion, readers will quickly become bored with the presentation and tune out the writer's message. So there are words that are provided for you in the module in a document that will help you understand better different verbs and introductory methods that you can use so that you're not saying the exact same thing over and over again. Let's talk about integrating quotes. This, again, we've been talking about this all semester, but it can't hurt to review it again. When you include quotes, make sure that they are integrated smoothly into the argument, that they flow and the syntax of the paper without any logical or grammatical jolts. All borrowed ideas or words should be accompanied by a signal phrase that names the author or otherwise alerts the reader to the information that the information is from a source. I cannot stress to you how important this is. So let's look at what that looks like. The best signal phrase is connect the quote to the point you're trying to make. So here's an example. George Smith, another supporter of cloning and the president of the Human Cloning Foundation, believes that science fiction works have created hysteria in the popular media. Smith argues, from Frankenstein to the Sixth Day, our popular media has done nothing but stir up the public's anxiety about monsters. His views on the popular media tell us, ... and the paragraph would continue. So pay attention to the fact that the author was introduced. We get a phrase where we understand who he is, in other words, what his credibility is, and then we actually get a quote of what he says. So you should always be introducing your authors and your sources. Here's another one. A view that contradicts Smith's is articulated by John Brown, who contends that God never intended for man to participate in his acts of creation. He will never condone our inference in his plan for us. Brown makes it clear that, and of course that would continue. Once you've introduced the author, you don't have to do it every single time, but the first time you use the source, you should give us his name or her name along with what his or her credibility is as a contributor to your argument. Quotations have to be integrated into a sentence, and they have to agree grammatically. And even if you have to modify the quote with brackets. So Smith argues that the popular media look only to the profit they can gain from the picture they paint of the cloning procedure. So what's in brackets has been added by the writer, and the brackets tell us that. But by doing that, it's all grammatically correct. Work on varying your sentence structure. Sentences containing quotes should be varied in structure for greater readability. Here's some examples. In the words of the researcher Herbert Terrace, as Flora Davis has noted, the gardeners, Washoe's trainers, point out, blank, whatever the quote is, claims Noam Chomsky. Terrence answers these objections with the following analysis. These are all great ways to vary the way you're introducing a quote so that you're not constantly using the exact same format. Introductory clauses and phrases should always be logical and grammatical, so please don't say, in Smith's essays he says, or in Smith's essay it says, or Smith's essay states. Instead, use in his essay Smith states. Please establish your author credibility. That is so important. When introducing a quote, add information about the author that will either establish his or her expertise or question his or her credibility or motives. You know, looking at your opposing voice, you may have a source where someone is making a claim and he or she is not qualified to do so, and you certainly could call that into question. So here's an example. Smith, president of the NSS, argues that Jones, who seems to make a career out of disagreeing with Smith, has to say, and those are two different examples, again, of how the credibility is being established. So we know Smith is the president of NSS, and we know that Jones obviously frequently disagrees with him based on those two phrases. Please make sure you characterize your publications. In other words, where what type of source you have. The same strategy can be used to characterize a publication. So the National Review, a publication well known for its conservative stance, includes Smith's opinions on a regular basis. Now we know that that is a credible source. This, again, is the chart that I was referencing to help you use different verbs to vary your sentence structure and the way you introduce your information. So you might want to download this PowerPoint. I will save it as a PDF and include it so that you can access this list and use it. So what to say if the author is neutral, what to say when he or she is just implying or suggesting something, which words to use when he's making a claim or disagreeing or agreeing. This is some really good information when you're thinking about your quotes. Use it to make sure you've done it correctly. So number one, are the name, title, and page headers and numbers formatted properly? Does each direct quote have quotation marks around it? Is the author's name included in the text or a parenthetical citation for each summary, paraphrase, and quote? Is the page number included in the parenthetical citation if available? If no page number is available, has the paragraph number been included in the parenthetical citation? Now, that is actually something from, I believe, APA, and that's not required in MLA, so you can actually omit number 5. Here's some more. Number 6, is the date included after the author's name in APA-style essays? Again, that's not us. We're using MLA. Is the author referred to by his or her last name in the text? Is the end punctuation placed outside the parenthetical citation? Are long quotes used sparingly? And are long quotes blocked and punctuated correctly according to the appropriate style? Are quotes introduced by the writer or simply dropped in? Remember, we don't want dumped quotes. Are the signal phrases that introduce quotes grammatically correct? Are the quotes introduced with meaningful verbs and followed up with relevant commentary of your own? And is the sentence structure that contains quotations varied? Do you see any of the 4 indications of loss of control, such as salting syndrome, weak weave, overpowering opinion, or the dreary design? These are all things to help you as you continue to work on your draft, writing your draft. Again, I'm going to save this as a PDF so that you can print it out, particularly to have access to this list right here, but also to have an access to these various checklist questions. Remember, number 5 and number 6 do not apply to your essays because you're using MLA style, so don't let that confuse you. Good luck to you. By all means, if you have questions, then please don't hesitate to ask.